Alright, today I'm going to share with you everything you need to know about using anamorphic lenses with your iPhone. So first of all, what are anamorphic lenses? Anamorphic lenses are designed to squeeze your image so then you can de-squeeze it in post-production and get a wider horizontal field of view. So the vertical field of view is going to remain the same, but the horizontal field of view is going to get wider. However, there are other things that come when using anamorphic lenses, such as oval-shaped bokeh, although it's not really applicable to the iPhone because the depth of field is really deep, but also you will get the famous anamorphic lens flares, which come in a variety of colors like neutral white, blue, and orange. Usually these lenses are used in Hollywood movies, so if you want to make your iPhone footage more cinematic, if you will, definitely consider getting an anamorphic lens for your iPhone, especially if you want to get a wider horizontal field of view or the famous anamorphic lens flares. Now, each anamorphic lens will also have a different squeeze ratio, and the higher the squeeze ratio, the wider the horizontal field of view you are going to get. And usually, at least as far as I know, the iPhone anamorphic lenses do not go higher than 1.55x anamorphic squeeze ratio. So here I have a 1.33x anamorphic lens, here as well a 1.33x, which is pretty much the standard. But if you want to get something that gives you a wider field of view, horizontal field of view, definitely consider getting an anamorphic lens with a 1.55x squeeze ratio. Now, how do you actually mount an anamorphic lens to your iPhone? First of all, you can just use a generic iPhone case, then buy an anamorphic lens and mount it on the iPhone. It's not going to work. You have to either get a special cage or a case that allows you to mount these lenses to your iPhone. Now, each case and cage will have a different mounting system, and you have to make sure the lens and the cage or case have the same mounting system so they'll be cross-compatible with each other. For example, this cage is from Freewell and it has a 17mm thread mounting system, which is the one I recommend using, by the way. But this case, for example, is also from Freewell, but it uses a T mounting system, which is proprietary to Freewell. I recommend going with the 17mm thread mounting cases, cages, and lenses because it's more universal, easier to use, and in most cases it's also cheaper than the T-mounting system. And also the T-mounting system is a bit more confusing. For example, Moment T-mount lenses are not compatible with Freewell T-mount cases, cages, and so on. So it's a bit more confusing than 17mm thread mounting system. So if you want, to make it more simple for yourself, definitely choose a 17mm lens and also a cage or a case for your iPhone. Now, a couple of other things to consider when using anamorphic lenses with your iPhone. First of all, you have to somehow de-squeeze the footage in camera in the iPhone to be able to preview how it's going to look in post-production so that you can get the best composition possible. The way I do it is by using the Blackmagic camera application, which is completely free, by the way. In there you have an option to de-squeeze anamorphic lenses with a 1.33x squeeze ratio and also 1.55x. But for example, the built-in camera application on the iPhone does not have this option. So make sure the camera application that you are using with your iPhone has an anamorphic de-squeeze option, because otherwise it's going to look very wonky and you won't be able to properly compose your shot. Also, when you are going to import the clips from your iPhone to your computer, you'll probably have to de-squeeze your footage in the video editing software you are using. But for example, because I'm using a Blackmagic, software on my phone to film the videos on my iPhone, and I also use DaVinci Resolve, which is also owned by Blackmagic, I don't really have to do anything because it's done automatically for me. But if you are to use something like Final Cut Pro, Premiere Pro, LumaFusion, and so on, I'm not sure how it's going to work. In most cases, you'll have to manually de-squeeze your footage to make it look normal. It is not hard by any means, but it's another step you have to take when shooting with an anamorphic lens with your iPhone. Now let's get to the more annoying things when using anamorphic lenses with your iPhone. First of all, these lenses, as you can see, rotate like this. Okay, this lens moves around and this lens as well. And I believe the reason they do it is because they can't really predict how it's going to sit on the case or cage you're going to use with your iPhone. So they give you the option to properly align the lens to make sure the vertical lines are perfectly straight when shooting with your iPhone and the anamorphic lens. However, this becomes very annoying because each time you take a shot, you have to make sure this is perfectly straight. And if you are like me and you use ND filters, I'm gonna put this filter in front of the lens, and then you're going to set the proper exposure with the ND. At the same time, you are also going to move the lens, right? So you have to make sure the exposure is correct with the ND filter, and you also have to make sure the lens is aligned properly to get proper vertical lines when shooting your videos. Next is stabilization. From my experience with anamorphic lenses and the iPhone, the stabilization performance degrades significantly. Even if you do like very subtle handheld movements, you'll see some wobbles on the sides of the frame, and it's pretty much impossible to stabilize in post-production. So what I do now to combat that is I use a proper gimbal. And even when using a gimbal, the stabilization is not really the best, especially if you're doing very fast-paced camera movements. All right, finally, image quality. The image quality is also going to degrade slightly, especially on the sides of the frame. You're going to see some mushiness, some softness in the sides of the frame, and also you will see some vignetting. But if you are going to get a very high quality anamorphic lens for your iPhone, like this Freewell 1.33x lens, everything in the center is going to be very sharp. It's just that you're going to get some soft corners, and also the vignetting is going to be pretty noticeable in the sides of the frame. So is it worth using anamorphic lenses with an iPhone? I think it does if you are a camera geek like me and want to experiment, or you want to stand out compared to other iPhone shooters, because honestly, not a lot of people will mount an anamorphic lens to the iPhone and deal with all of the problems that I've mentioned in this video, like having to align the lens properly to get perfectly straight vertical lines. Also, you'll have to deal with stabilization somehow. So you'll have to either use a gimbal, a slider, a tripod, or something like that, or you'll have to be very mindful how you move the camera when shooting handheld. But if you're like just a casual shooter and you want to get everything super quickly, an anamorphic lens is definitely not for you, because it requires, in my personal opinion, a lot of patience. I highly recommend this lens from Freewell. That's the best one that I've used. I'm going to leave some links down below. It delivers fantastic image quality, but again, you will have to, work a little bit more if you want to get the best anamorphic footage from your iPhone, like having to align the lens properly using a gimbal or something like that. So I guess this is it for today. Let me know down below if you have any questions or comments. And also don't forget to check out my iPhone LUTs at the same time. And I guess I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.